It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind that slips by unnoticed if not for the constant tick of the kitchen clock. Alyssa sat curled on the living room couch, a lukewarm mug of coffee resting between her palms. The house was unusually calm. No arguing parents, no awkward small talk over dinner, just silence. A rare gift. She lived with her mother Linda and stepfather Mark in the suburbs, an arrangement that had never really felt like home. Ever since her mom remarried, Alyssa kept to herself. She worked remotely, spent most of her evenings reading, or scrolling through meaningless content, and tried her best not to get in the way. At 24, she felt older than her years, emotionally tired, quietly drifting. The calm broke with the sound of the front door creaking open. "Jake?" her mother called out with mild surprise. Alyssa's heart sank slightly. She hadn't heard that name in years, and yet there he was. Jake stood in the doorway, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, wearing a gray hoodie and that same lopsided smirk she remembered from high school. Her stepbrother, older by a year, taller by a foot, and charming in a way that had always felt a little too casual, too familiar. He had been away for a long time, living with his biological mother in another state. Alyssa had only ever seen him during occasional holiday gatherings, and even those had been brief, always overshadowed by parental tensions. Now he was back. Linda greeted him with an awkward hug, while Mark hovered in the background, silent, visibly tense. No explanations were offered, just a vague, "He's going to stay for a while." Alyssa said nothing. She nodded politely, pretending not to notice the way Jake looked at her, longer than necessary, like he was trying to place a memory. Later that evening, she found him in the kitchen, leaning against the fridge, sipping soda straight from the bottle. "You've changed," he said with a half smile. She raised an eyebrow. "Did I used to be worse?" He chuckled. "No, just younger. You look good." His words hovered in the air longer than they should have. Alyssa cleared her throat and turned away, but the heat on her cheeks lingered. It wasn't a compliment you expected from a stepbrother, not the way he said it. The following days blurred together. Jake settled in like he had never left, feet on the coffee table, teasing her over breakfast, casually slipping into her personal space. He had a way of speaking that made everything sound harmless, even when it wasn't. "You're the only normal one in this house," he said one evening as they watched a movie in the dim glow of the living room. His leg brushed against hers. "You don't even know me," she replied. He looked at her for a beat. "Maybe I want to." Alyssa laughed it off, but something inside her stirred. It was wrong. She knew it. But he wasn't her blood. They hadn't grown up together. Technically, they were barely even family. Still, the weight of unspoken boundaries pressed on her chest like a warning. One night, Linda and Mark announced they were leaving town for a weekend couples retreat. Alyssa was told to keep the house running, water the plants, bring in the mail, feed the dog. Jake? He was staying back too. "Minor injury," Mark muttered, gesturing vaguely to Jake's ankle, though Alyssa hadn't noticed him limping. By Saturday evening, the storm rolled in. Thunder growled outside as Alyssa curled under a blanket in bed, scrolling through old photos. She paused on one, an old Christmas photo with Jake in the corner, grinning, his arm slung around someone else. She didn't even remember the moment, but now it felt heavier somehow. Her phone vibrated. A message. "Jake. Can't sleep. Thunder's driving me nuts. Mind if I crash in your room for a bit? Just talk." Her heart thudded. She stared at the screen. The house was big, quiet, and every creak of the wind made it feel emptier. "Alyssa." "Sure. Door's open." Moments later, he entered. T-shirt damp from the rain, hair tousled, barefoot. He didn't ask before sitting on the edge of her bed. "You okay?" she asked softly. He shrugged. "Just feels better not being alone." She nodded, shifting over to give him space. The mattress dipped under his weight. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Jake looked at her, really looked, and whispered, "This feels strange, but not in a bad way." Alyssa's breath caught. The thunder outside masked the silence between them. And just like that, everything began to change. Jake didn't say much as he settled beside her. The room was dim, lit only by the soft blue hue of Alyssa's night lamp. The thunder outside had softened into a distant rumble, like a reminder that the world was still moving even if time in her room seemed to slow down. Alyssa tried to keep her breathing steady, but the tension between them was sharp, like the air just before a storm breaks. Jake lay back, hands behind his head, his arm almost brushing hers. Neither of them made eye contact, but both were aware of the closeness. Too aware. "I used to hate this house," Jake said after a while, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Felt like a guest here. Never knew where I belonged." Alyssa glanced over. "You were barely around. I didn't think it mattered." "It did," he replied. "I just didn't know how to show it." His voice was softer than she remembered. Vulnerable. It chipped away at her defenses, piece by piece. She wanted to tell him that she understood. Because she did. They were both side characters in someone else's marriage, two people absorbed into a family that never fully accepted them. She turned toward him. "I've always felt like I was in the way here, like I had to shrink myself just to be tolerated." He looked at her then, really looked. "That's exactly how I feel." The silence that followed was heavier than before, yet strangely comforting. Alyssa felt her heart shift, like something forbidden was slowly waking inside her. She wasn't sure if it was attraction or loneliness, or maybe both twisted together in a way she couldn't untangle. Jake shifted closer. Not too much, but enough for the edge of his knee to touch hers. She didn't move away. "You know," he said quietly, "if we weren't step anything, this wouldn't feel so complicated." Alyssa didn't reply. Her thoughts were a blur of conflict. She should have shut the conversation down. She should have reminded him and herself that this was wrong. But instead, her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Sometimes, I wish we weren't." Jake exhaled slowly, like he'd been waiting for her to say it. Then he reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered near her cheek. Her skin burned beneath his touch. She froze. "Is this okay?" he asked, voice husky. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned into his hand, eyes half-lidded. The space between them vanished. His lips brushed against hers, tentative, unsure. She didn't pull back. She kissed him. It wasn't a rush. It wasn't heat and desperation. It was soft, slow, filled with hesitation. Like they were both testing the weight of a boundary they knew they were about to break. Jake's hand slid gently to her waist, anchoring her as he deepened the kiss. Her fingers tangled in the fabric of his shirt, gripping him as if grounding herself to something real. The sound of the storm outside faded. The only thing that existed was this moment. The warmth of his mouth. The beat of her pulse. The way her breath caught every time his hands moved with cautious reverence. It felt like time was collapsing around them. Every warning her conscience screamed was muffled by the way he whispered her name between kisses. It didn't feel like sin. It felt like surrender. He pulled back slightly, searching her face. "We can stop." She stared into his eyes. "I don't want to." And with that, they crossed the line. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them was louder than words. The bed sheets tangled. Her heart raced. His hands were warm, steady, and more gentle than she'd ever imagined. It wasn't lust. Not completely. It was years of distance combusting into intimacy. When it was over, they lay side by side, staring at the ceiling like strangers who had just shared something irreversible. Jake reached for her hand. That wasn't just a mistake, was it? She didn't know how to answer. A part of her wanted to believe it meant something. But another part, the part still grounded in reality, knew the morning would demand answers neither of them were ready to give. So instead, she whispered, "Let's not talk about it right now." He nodded. "Okay." She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the image of his face beside hers, the scent of his skin on the pillow, and the weight of what they'd done clung to her like smoke after a fire. Nothing would be the same again. And deep down, she knew it wasn't just one night. It was the beginning of something far more complicated. The morning after was quieter than expected. Alyssa woke up to the smell of rain still clinging to the air, her sheets creased with warmth that hadn't yet faded. Jake was gone. The dent in the pillow beside her was the only evidence he'd ever been there. She sat up slowly, pressing her fingers to her temples. Her body felt sore, but it was her mind that ached. What had she done? She replayed everything. The way he touched her like she was precious, the softness in his voice, the way her name sounded when he whispered it between kisses. It hadn't felt wrong in the moment. It had felt necessary. But now, in the cold light of day, it felt dangerous. She pulled on a sweatshirt and walked down the hall barefoot. The house was still. No Jake, no noise, just her thoughts echoing in every room. He was in the kitchen when she found him, back turned, pouring coffee into 2 mugs like it was just another day, like they hadn't shattered a boundary overnight. "You're up," he said, without turning around. She crossed her arms. "You left." "I didn't want to make it weird," he replied, finally glancing over. His expression was unreadable. "It's already weird," she said flatly. Jake handed her a mug, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "I know." They stood in silence, both sipping coffee like it might drown the guilt pooling inside them. "Was it just the storm?" she asked finally, voice almost too quiet. Jake looked at her for a long moment. "It wasn't nothing, Alyssa, but I don't know what it was yet. Do you?" She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. She didn't know what to say. Everything about last night felt tangled. Intimate, yes, but not defined. Not safe. "I need space," she muttered. Jake nodded. "Okay." She turned and left the kitchen, her chest tight, her thoughts spiraling. Hours passed. Alyssa distracted herself with work, laundry, anything to avoid the silence that screamed between walls. By evening, she still hadn't found peace. The shame, the curiosity, the hunger, it all blended into one confusing ache. But the unease only grew when she spotted Jake's phone lying on the couch, unlocked. She shouldn't have looked. She knew that, but her hand moved before her logic could stop it. A message thread sat open, mid-conversation with a contact saved only as M. Did she fall for it yet? Jake. Working on it. She's not what I expected. Alyssa's breath caught. Her stomach dropped as if the floor had vanished beneath her. She scrolled further. M. Just get what you need. Don't forget why you went back. Jake. I won't. But she's not like the others. The screen dimmed in her trembling hand. She stood still for a long time, as if frozen in disbelief. Everything, his return, the late-night conversation, the kiss, the intimacy, had been part of something else. A plan, a dare, a game? Her eyes burned. Rage began to rise, slow and hot, spreading like a wildfire she couldn't contain. She waited until he came back from the backyard, and she didn't give him a second to breathe. "What the hell is this?" she snapped, holding out the phone. Jake went pale. His eyes darted to the screen. "Alyssa, I can explain." "Don't," her voice cracked. "You used me. You manipulated me. For what? Some joke with your friends? Did you bet on how fast I'd open my legs?" "It's not what you think," he said, stepping closer. "Then tell me," she spat, eyes flashing. "Tell me what I think this is." Jake exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't come back because I missed anyone. I needed a place to stay. I messed up. My ex kicked me out. I had nowhere else to go, and Mark hates me, so I thought maybe If I could prove I could hold it together here, I'd buy time. Alyssa stared, jaw clenched. And me? She asked. What? Was I? Comfort? Distraction? Jake looked at her, pained. I didn't plan that night, Alyssa. But when I saw you, when I talked to you, it wasn't fake. That part, I swear, you made me feel something real and I didn't know how to handle it. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, quietly unraveling. Jake reached out like he wanted to fix it with a touch. She stepped back. You don't get to feel anything now, she whispered. Then she turned, walked to her room, and locked the door. She sat on the floor, back pressed to the wall, eyes wide open. What hurt wasn't that it happened. What hurt was realizing she hadn't just been used, she'd allowed herself to believe it meant something. And maybe, in some twisted way, it had. But it didn't matter now. That night was over. What came next would hurt even more.